When I first moved to Oakley, Kansas, one of the things I heard most often from the locals was that I had to check out what they called the Chalk Pyramids. Have you been to the Chalk Pyramids yet? Make sure to get up to the Chalk Pyramids at some point. They sure are something. You know, they're one of the 8 wonders of Kansas. I put aside the question of why Kansas felt it needed 8 wonders and decided to look up the Chalk Pyramids online. The folks in Oakley were referring to what are known officially as the Monument Rocks. Apparently the first ever registered national natural landmark, the Monument Rocks are about 20 miles south of Oakley near the Smoky Hill River. At first I resented the town folks urging me to go, but after seeing the photos online, I had to agree with them. Over the endless expanse of flat nothing that covers the rest of Kansas, these huge rock formations sprouted from the ground up to 70 feet in the air. Their jagged edges and towering forms contrasted sharply with the surrounding plains. Many of them had shapes like giant buttes and arches. I don't know for sure, but I could have sworn seeing structures like these in a movie somewhere. At only 20 minutes away, I figured I probably owed it to myself, as well as the townspeople, to check the rocks out at some point. But before I could find time to visit the rocks, it turns out the rocks actually reached out to me first. It was a few weeks ago, back in April. I got a call from the coroner's office. A total of 12 bodies had been recovered down by the Monument Rocks, and the coroner was having some trouble identifying a cause of death. There were no physical marks or blemishes, and their blood tested negative for any foreign substances. After getting a good look at one of the bodies for myself, I was initially just as stumped as he was. All 12 of them seemed to have just dropped dead of their own accord. 11 of them were all between the ages of 23 and 26, while the 12th was a 47-year-old man. The immediate impression I got was of a teacher and a group of college students. With a mystery like this, I figured I could use some more information, so I called up the coroner. According to him, my initial assumption was correct. They were a group of college seniors from the University of Maryland who were on a field trip to excavate and collect fossils from the Monument Rocks, having gotten permission from the landowner. They were only discovered after they failed to check out with him 9 days later. None of this information helped me to discover a cause of death. With no other options, I decided to autopsy the professor. My initial observations added nothing more than confusion to the issue, right up until I reached the lungs. As I cut into one of the lungs with my scalpel, fluid began gushing from the tissue wall. As far as I could tell, it was just ordinary water, though further analysis would have to be done, of course. A quick examination of the liquid revealed that it was indeed water, although with very high salinity. The saline levels were about equal to those found in salt water. You don't need to be a forensic pathologist to understand that when you find a dead person and their lungs are filled with water, they drowned. What's not so easy to understand is how a person in a landlocked state can drown in salt water. I moved on to one of the students and found the exact same results. Then another and another, 2 more. Each of them had lungs drowned in salt water. Not only are we hundreds of miles from the ocean, but the Monument Rocks aren't located near any water of any kind, save the Smoky Hill River, which was miles from where the class was found. I am a problem solver, and I do not like hanging questions. which is part of why I became a forensic pathologist in the first place. I wasn't about to leave a situation so puzzling go unexplained. My first step was to call the investigator in charge of the case in hopes of getting some more information. The only explanation that I could think of was that they had drowned somewhere else and then were brought back to their campsite. I admit, it doesn't make much sense, but it does make more sense than 12 people inexplicably drowning in the middle of a dry, barren wasteland. But as far as the investigator could tell, there were no signs of the scene of the incident to indicate that anyone else had been there. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing. So much for that theory. Desperate for more information, I asked if there was anything else he could tell me about this case. The first thing he did was give me a brief list of items collected from the scene that were being held as evidence. There were tents, sleeping bags, canteens, and other assorted items you'd expect to find at any given campsite. There were also a number of digging tools such as pickaxes, shovels, brushes, spades, hammers, and chisels. This made sense since the class had apparently gone there to collect fossils. The class must have been an advanced course on paleontology, as revealed by the textbooks also found there. Looks like they had some initial success, as a collection of fossils had also been found there. Neither the investigator nor I would have the expertise to identify them, but to him at least, they looked like shark's teeth, some small fish, seashells, and some larger bones that he couldn't make heads or tails of. Literally. The other thing he told me that seemed worth mentioning was that, although 12 bodies had been recovered, the class roster had 16 names on it. They tried contacting the additional 4 students, and while one was safe at home, having not gone on the trip at all, 3 were still unaccounted for. The more I learned, the more questions were raised. I spent days mulling it over, unsure of how I should identify the cause of death on their certificates. And then, one day, as I was pulling into a drive-thru at McDonald's at 10 p.m., it just came to me. It was the first pattern that arose out of all of this random, seemingly unconnected data. The fossils that the investigator listed to me, they were all from marine animals, fish, sharks, seashells, all creatures that live in saltwater environments. The victims all appeared to have drowned in salt water. I was still completely lost for an explanation, and it certainly could have just been a coincidence. But after weeks worth of frustrated confusion, I had finally found at least 2 pieces of information that seemed to fit together in some way. Now that I finally had some lead, however obtuse, I decided to do some research into the monument rocks themselves. I can't pretend to be an expert on anything here, but according to my research, the rocks were laid down 80 million years ago and are composed of chalk, hence their other name. Their presence indicates large amounts of tropical algae, and by extension, a vast, shallow sea. This sea is called the Western Interior Seaway, and was a waterway that covered the entire Midwest during the late Cretaceous period. It was home to giant carnivorous fish, toothed birds, sharks as large as jaws, turtles as big as a car, 60-foot sea lizards, and a whole bunch of other things. Bear in mind, this is all more or less copied from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. But just as I thought I might finally get somewhere, I hit another dead end. I had 2 things that seemed to relate to each other: 12 people who drowned in seawater on dry land in a place that was once at the bottom of a long-vanished ocean, but that was it. Nothing else. I tried to find something more, but I was lost. I guess it just has to be a coincidence, right? I mean, what else could it mean? The case was eventually declared unresolved. I didn't disclose what I found to the coroner, as I'm sure he wouldn't have believed me, since their lungs were drained at that point. I think the idea of heat stroke had somehow made its way to the families, but it had nothing to do with me. I think I lost some credibility for not being able to identify the cause of death of these people, but I'd rather lose credibility than my job. Can you imagine how people would react if I told them that 12 people drowned in salt water in the middle of a place that was pretty much a desert, if not for the grass? This case still confounds me, even today. It's the only one that I never felt I could confidently solve, or at least narrow down. Some days I'll just be going about my business and freeze up, thinking about this debacle. The longer I go, the more I start considering certain unusual possibilities. Or rather, impossibilities, I guess I should say. In science, there's no shame in admitting you don't know something, or that you can't as yet explain something. But the more time goes by, the more my imagination can't help but begin to fire up. I don't think I'll ever bring myself to actually say what I think happened. I don't know if I believe what I think I believe, but every time I start to get imaginative, I just try and sit down and remember the facts. That a class from the University of Maryland went to the Monument Rocks to look for fossils in a place once covered by a shallow sea. 12 of them drowned. 3 went missing.